y'all, let's sew up some Mae Bottoms. I'm sewing them as underwear. I'm using this cotton lycra. I have the stripes for the band, partial lining, and this little rainbow print for the main front and back. I'll be sewing up the partially lined version here. I'm gonna grab my front main piece, and then with right sides together, I'm going to put my back piece down on top of it, and I'm gonna line up the center crotch little notch that both have right here. If you're doing the fully lined version, that will be it, just the front and the back. But if you're doing partially lined like me, you'll add on this little lining piece, right sides to wrong sides to the back piece, just like this. And then we're gonna line up the edges of all three of these layers. Remember, you want to line them up perfectly at your seam allowance, which is 3/8. Don't necessarily worry about the three little corners lining up. You want it to line up right where your pin is, which is right at the 3/8 mark. Then if you need more pins or clips in between, you can certainly add more. I'm doing a youth size here, so there's not much room for another pin. Again, the seam allowance is 3/8, so I'm letting my serger shave off just a tiny little 1/8 of an inch. I always do smaller seam allowances on underwear and swimsuits. Just a little bit easier to keep everything nice and even. You usually always use 3/8 inch elastic as well, so that makes it a little bit easier. All right, next we're gonna open up our pieces. Then we're gonna flip our liner down like this. Give it a nice press, and then we're gonna baste our lining piece to our front piece just along the two little side seams. They should line up perfectly with each other. If you need to trim a tiny little bit off because you didn't get it perfectly lined up, it's no big deal. I use a basting stitch here, which is the longest length straight stitch. It's just a temporary hold so that this little lining piece doesn't move around on you in the next steps. I do a lot of basting on swimsuits, especially. I'm doing this one as a little pair of underwear, which is cotton lycra, and it's really easy to work with. It takes a press really easily. It kind of grips onto each other, holds itself in place. It's not slippery at all. But when you're making a swimsuit, depending on your swimsuit fabric, it can be a lot more challenging, a lot more slippery. You can't press nylon fabrics with a high heat like you can some knits like this one. So it makes it a little more challenging. So I do a lot of basting when I'm using swimsuit fabric, but I didn't want to skip that here in case you're using swimsuit fabric and it is more challenging and you need that basting. We're going to sew up the side seams now. If you're doing the fully lined, you'll just repeat that crotch seam on your lining pieces. And same with these side seams. We're going to sew up the side seams on the main. If you are fully lining, you'll just repeat sewing up your side seams of your lining. I really like a fully lined swimsuit. Just like the way it feels, the way it looks. Depending on the fabric, if you get a really nice quality thick swim fabric, you might not need it. My undies, I never line. I prefer them unlined, which is why I like to have both options in my patterns. You can make the fully lined reversible if you like that and you want that. I do not give those instructions. You have to leave the crotch seam open a little bit to turn inside out. You can find tutorials for how to make them reversible really easily online. But personally, me or my daughter never use reversible swimsuits. In the past, when I've made them, we pick our favorite side and we wear it on that side every time. And so I just quit ever making them. I make the one side and I use cheap, ugly lining fabric for the lining. Here's my waistband. You fold it in half horizontally, stitch your one seam here, making it into a circle. Then you're going to fold your waistband wrong sides together vertically. And I do recommend basting this along the bottom edges, especially if you're using that swim fabric that might be a little bit slippery, or if your fabric is rolling really badly. Sometimes even cotton spandexes, which I said are easy to work with, sometimes they roll really bad on the edges. And if you're having a hard time with that, basting really eliminates that problem. I like to baste 1/8 of an inch away from the edge almost always. I'm going to mark in even quarters. I've already have my waistband marked in the center front, and then the seam is going to be the center back. I always cut a center notch on all my pieces, especially when they're put on the fold or when it's just marked on the center. It's a quick little 30-second notch to cut, and it always ends up saving me time later on when I'm matching up centers or matching up pieces. I highly recommend forming that habit. I will never quit doing that. Now I'm just lining up our quarter points, the waistband to the bottoms. The waistband will stretch just a little bit to fit the bottom piece. The adult barely stretches at all, and the kid stretches a little bit more. There's no elastic here in this waistband or the seam, which is very unusual for me for swimsuits. Usually I like to put elastic all around the edges, so to make sure it stays nice and snug, I made the waistband a little snugger than normal, and that way it stays in place when they're diving in, swimming around, and for you as well. Now we're just going to stitch the waistband to the main fabric. If you are lining, you will put your lining pieces right sides to the waistband as well, and you'll sew all three together. That way the lining hides that seam. It's a good method to use if your little one is sensitive to having seams, or you might be sensitive to feeling seams on your skin. Again, you'll have to slightly stretch the waistband to fit to the bottoms. It should not feel like a lot, just a little bit. If you basted the edges of your waistband though, it might feel like you're stretching it a little bit more just because the basting kind of restricts that stretch. Again, I'm using my serger here. If you don't have a serger, it's no problem. You can sew underwear, swimsuits with a regular sewing machine. Just going to use your favorite stretch stitch for construction. A lot of people like a triple step straight stitch. You do have to make sure it's a stretch one though. A normal straight stitch will not work. Sometimes you can get away with that on knit garments, but with underwear and swimsuits, the fabric stretches so much and it is a tight fit. It stretches to go onto your body. You will pop stitches if you try to use a straight stitch. Even if you stretch your fabric while you're sewing it to give it a little bit of stretch, swim and underwears are so fitted that it needs more stretch than that is going to give you. So you really need to use a stretch stitch rather than trying to get away with a little bit of stretch you can with a straight stitch. A lightning stitch is another really popular one if you don't have a serger, or an overcast stitch. Since I'm doing these as underwear, I'm going to use this 3/8 inch clear elastic. You could also use cotton elastic. I prefer the clear elastic for underwear because it's thinner and I feel like it's much more comfortable. But you can experiment and see what you like. For swimwear, I highly prefer the cotton swim elastic versus the rubber. I just think it's 1,000 times easier to use. I also think it's way softer to wear. I like to start behind the crotch seam right here, and then I'm just going to add the elastic in 1 to 1. I'm not going to be stretching the elastic, but I'm not going to be stretching the knit fabric either. Just want to hold your elastic kind of taut, but without stretching it. And we are going to do that all along the crotch and all along the front piece leg line. I do give measurements as a guide for elastic, and you can use that until you are confident in adding in elastic. I always think adding in elastic by feel, like I'm doing now, is the best way to do it because all elastic is different. I highly prefer Lastine elastic. It's softer, it's stretchier, it's easier to work with. But if you don't have that, it's gonna feel different for you for whatever brand elastic you're using. On the back, we're not gonna follow along 1 to 1. We are gonna stretch our elastic just a little bit. It's because to cup under the booty, we need it to curve a little bit. So this is how we're gonna make this 2D piece fit a little bit more 3D butt cheeks. So what I like to do is I pull my elastic at a diagonal and then I stretch it to fit the curve. So if you're doing a fuller coverage swimsuit or underwear, you're going to end up stretching a lot more. If you're doing something with a cheekier cut, you're not really going to end up stretching it at all. So if you're doing the adult and you're doing the cheeky and you're thinking, this elastic guide doesn't even have me stretch it at all, that's correct. If you're doing the fuller coverage, you'll have to stretch it just a little bit, just like I did on this youth one, because youth only has the fuller coverage. Once we're basted on and we're happy with our elastic, meaning it looks great, the front is laying nice and flat, there's not gathering along the front, there's also not waving out, we haven't accidentally stretched our knit fabric, then what we're going to do is we're going to fold it under and then top stitch. I'm going to be using my cover stitch machine. You can also use your regular sewing machine. I actually usually prefer my sewing machine. I love a triple step zigzag. And that way on your sewing machine, you can work from the inside instead of doing it from the right side where you can't really see your folded up edge. You want to make sure that when you're top stitching, you're getting your needles really close to this folded up edge down here. You don't want it close to the bottom folded edge. You want it encompassing that raw edge that's folded up on the wrong side. Otherwise, you'll find if you get it a little too close to the edge and you don't catch that raw edge underneath, your elastic's going to want to flip away from your body, and it's just not going to look as nice and neat. That's why sewing from a sewing machine is a lot easier, especially if you're a beginner. You can see where your needle is hitting on that raw edge, and you can make sure you're getting it all the way over. I'm just using my cover stitch here because I had the right color thread in it. I won't lie to y'all. I had the hot pink in there that I basted with, and I happened to have white in the cover stitch, and I did not want to change my thread. otherwise, I usually top stitch all my swimwear and most of my underwear as well with a triple step zigzag. Okay, once we're done top stitching, then you want to remove this basting thread. I do love basting with a really contrasting color like I did here. It makes removing basting stitches so much easier. On knit fabric is pretty easy as well because all you have to do is stretch your fabric out along the seams and your straight stitch will pop and break, and so then it's pretty easy to remove. So that's what I'm doing here. I'll just pop it, break it a little bit, and then remove it. You know, it's never really fun, and you can just pop the stitches and then leave your basting thread in there, but you do want to make sure you pop it all along the seam at least. If you don't want to remove it, you do need to at least pop the seam all around, or else when you go to put your swimsuit or your underwear on, not only is it going to feel really tight, but those stitches will pop. And then it's the terrifying sound of stitches popping as you're putting a garment on. And even if you know they're basting stitches and you're not worried about it, it's still going to feel a lot tighter with those basting stitches in than if you remove them. So if you just pop them, you try it on and it feels a little tight, remove at least some of the basting stitches, especially if it feels tight in a certain area around your legs, before making any other changes. Because it will pop the stitches where it absolutely needed and stay as tight as possible without popping anymore. Does that make sense? So remove those basting stitches for ultimate comfort. Repeat on the other side, and you're done. Little pair of underwear for my little girl, and they're so quick and easy, and they're so fun to make too.